Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks, Mike and Mark and Vikram and Marty. And so we would like to, we are a few minutes behind, so we'll try and move with alacrity here, but take a few questions. Anything from the audience? Mike Kratky.
Joel, you mentioned accelerating. Thank you. Did you mention accelerating growth between 25 and 27 as part of the LRP? How should we think about the cadence of growth within that? And then I have one more.
It's a great question, and we do see the cumulative effect of the work that we're doing across the different clinical development, product development, and market development, all giving us more shots on goal from a growth perspective. And so I think if you think about the growth that we're delivering today, and you think about all that, we do see ongoing opportunities to accelerate growth over the plan period. We're not guiding beyond 25 today, but we do absolutely see where we're building a portfolio of growth opportunities here that we think will contribute to that.
Got it. Understood. And maybe one for Dr. Morell. Can you talk a little bit about your level of confidence in the Nautilus study, from a scientific rationale standpoint? What gives you confidence that this is going to be a study that can be, effective and successful based on some of the things you mentioned earlier?
We're going to talk about the Nautilus this afternoon. And so let me hold on some of that. But I'll tell you that we know epilepsy and we know how the RNS system works. There are sufficient publications that FDA decided they'd grant us a breakthrough designation. And then I'll show you where we are and how we are looking at expansion using really good clinical trial data.
Thanks very much.
You bet. Go ahead.
Thanks so much for taking the time, everyone. Rohan Patel from JP Morgan. I guess the first question I had for you, thanks. First question I had for you, Joel, was actually about your LRP targets for cash flow break even. Just wanted to clarify, is that a 2027 comment over your revenue CAGR LRP? And also, if you could just walk through some of the levers there and what's driving the operational leverage over the period.
It is, when we think about cash flow break even, the point for us is to exit the long range plan period in a position to be in cash flow break even. So we'll march our way toward it over the plan, but 27 being that period of time where we expect to maintain a cash flow break even status for the business. And the most important thing, and many of us have talked about this, the most important thing we can do to improve our cash burn rate is to grow the revenue line. With gross margins where they are, it's a growth story. And it's a growth story with gross margin discipline and operating expense allocation optimization. That's what we've been doing. We made a fair bit of progress on changing cash, and we see that continuing over the plan period. That said, we have not hesitated, and we will not hesitate to invest in the growth opportunities that we see in the business. We think they're real and they're in flight, and so you got to invest to take advantage of those, and we're going to. But so yeah, it's a growth story. And to Mike's earlier point, the accumulation in my affectionately referred to, we call it the ramp slide. That growth is what really drives the change in the cash profile of the business, with then good operating discipline along the way.
Got it. And then I guess the second question I had was for Dr. Rao. Thanks for sharing all that exciting information about some of these AI software tools. Just kind of, I was hoping if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the applicability for those tools outside of the traditional kind of epilepsy clinical manifestation. Maybe if you could provide a specific example, or maybe something that's where the anonymized data is valuable outside of an area that RNS targets today.
Well, that's a good question. One example that comes to mind is, and it is still in the epilepsy space, but I think it speaks to something broader, which is there are patterns in the data that we have seen by virtue of the chronicity of the recordings. If you do a 1 week study, that's one thing. If you look at brain activity that unfolds over months to years, you see something very different. We can see that there is actually a temporal structure and an organization to the data that we never really knew existed. And that enables all kinds of things, like, for example, anticipating when person is likely to have their next seizure. This, by the way, is not a functionality of the RNS system in its current form. This is research. But I think it speaks to something broader and an ability to predict or to forecast, as we say, when somebody's going to have their next seizure or be at risk of a sort of significant event. We've never really been able to do that. So that's one example. I don't know if that really gets to your question.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking more like outside of epilepsy, outside of seizures.
I see.
We will.
Mental health.
Like
Yeah, we will
neuropsychiatric
be
disorders.
talking about that this afternoon. Dr. Samir Sheth, who does a lot of research outside of epilepsy, will be discussing that. And I will also be talking about a use of the data in a collaboration with an early pharma company to demonstrate target engagement, which provides us an opportunity to really think about utilizing this data in a way that is of benefit to NeuroPace and benefit in therapeutic development.
So you have to come back after the break, Rohan.
You do. Yeah, you do.
Mike.
Thank you, Mike Polark, Wolf Research. Probably for the doctors, jump ball. Question on, let's assume a successful Nautilus study and indication expansion into generalized. Within neuromodulation, how do you think about segmenting the patients, VNS versus RNS? My understanding is VNS technically doesn't have a generalized label in the US, but is used frequently off-label. And I think OUS, there is some specific regulatory language. So, is there overlap in those patients? If so, how might you see it? And, relative to your practice today, VNS versus RNS, again, assuming a successful Nautilus study, what does the VNS RNS mix look like in 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I'm going to answer by, again, telling you to come back after lunch. We can kind of show in our post-approval study how practice patterns are changing with RNS coming first. But I think Mark Richardson would be a really good person. Mark, how do you decide whether you want to use VNS, the standard fixed anatomic target continuous stimulation, DBS, or RNS?
There we go. For our group, this is pretty straightforward now. I mean, we basically never put in a VNS because we think it has the least chance for efficacy, and you can't record any data. So I describe all the options for the patients, but I tell them that's my least favorite, for those reasons. Very rarely someone will choose a VNS. We have, I think if you looked how quickly the Nautilus trial enrolled, there is a real desire to give these generalized epilepsy patients this therapy, and a therapy that's better than VNS, because even in centers that do a lot of VNS, the reason they do a lot is because there is no other option. They'd rather do that than nothing. We've, for instance, flipped our pediatric group here, who used to do a lot of VNS for things like tuberous sclerosis, other pediatric generalized disorders. Now we go to RNS first. And when you combine the ability to get the data and to customize the therapy, you can cover a wide range of these generalized epilepsies without flying blind like you do with VNS. And VNS it's not in the brain, it's not without side effects. It can be painful, it can affect people's voice, and so on. When you explain to patients the difference in potential efficacy, it's really, really rare for someone to say, well, I'd rather you put this thing in my neck than do the brain surgery. And they understand the brain surgery is really safe and really personalized. So this is a very easy decision for us. And I think you see this trend kind of continue.
Thanks, Mark.
If I can just come in 1 second, Joel. I just looked at our 2024 numbers, and we removed more VNSs than we implanted for all the reasons that Mark.
Oh yeah, I definitely remove more VNS than I implant, for sure.
Sorry, Joel, go ahead.
Not at all. We are up against it here. Appreciate all the questions. We are going to take a 10-minute or just maybe a little bit less break, and we'll come back in and start as close to 10:30 as we can. So thank you.